Hey everybody, welcome to Overcoming Average. So today Brad Zimmerman's on with us. It's been a long time, man. We've been we've been talking about doing this for a while, and I've been on your podcast, and now finally we had the time to.
We're all running out of neighbors.
yeah, it's crazy. I started interviewing neighbors during the coronavirus, and now I've gone through a good number. But again, there's always something interesting about people.
Oh yeah,
and you realize. Good friends, even you learn stuff. I say that all the time, that you learn stuff about people. You're like, wow, I never knew that about them. So
yeah, and I think even now, everyone is being starved for human interaction. So when you do have it, you're asking really good questions, and you're really paying attention because you've missed that, or at least I have.
Oh, definitely. Well, and I want to hear your kind of origin story because you're a California boy, and I've, as a North Carolinian native, I've always wondered, like, why here? Even though I love here and I've traveled a good bit and always come back here, I always wonder, like, what brought people here? So let's start at the beginning. Where'd you come from?
So, my name's Brad. Thanks for having me.
Yes.
So I was born in Long Beach, California, and my parents, my mother's from Nebraska, and my dad is originally from California. So they met, I think, late high school, early college. And I was born in 1974, and we lived in Long Beach for about 6 years. Then we moved to Irvine. I'm an only child. There's some things good and some things bad with that.
Totally.
And my childhood growing up was great. It was easy. It was there was no stress. It was my dad. Had a quote unquote 9-to-5 job. My mom, she had a few different jobs, mostly secretarial but interesting stuff. And we moved to Irvine, California. So moving from Long Beach in 1980-ish. Long Beach is an older town. The houses were built, 20s, 30s, and 40s. And moving to Irvine, Irvine was one of the first master plan communities in the country. It was written up in the LA Times at the time, and it's almost a little stale and vanilla sometimes. But there's a pod of houses, much like this neighborhood is. You have like 3 main streets with all the houses on, and then each pod of houses had an elementary school, and then there was Northwood, Southwood, Eastwood, and Westwood, and so really? Each quadrant had a school. They had a supporting school. Elementary school, and then there was like 2 middle schools, and then that fed to 1 high school. So everything's planned. The houses look somewhat similar. It was a master plan community. So we lived on a cul-de-sac. There was, I think, 18 houses on the cul-de-sac, and I remember my dad counting one time. He's like, there's 36 kids on this street. And it was 36 kids, like all under the age of like 13. Yeah. So it was cool. Obviously the internet didn't exist, and we played outside and got hurt and rode bikes and listened to music, and it was all really cool. My dad was somewhat athletic. My mom wasn't necessarily athletic, but she came from an athletic family. So and I'm a slightly above average athlete. I am not a great athlete at all, but I played soccer as a little kid, and I got into volleyball actually pretty late, early high school, and I played that through high school. Was not good enough to play in college. At 6'2", then I was the runt.
Were you at 6'2" in high school?
Yeah, I hit about 6'2". Just about my senior year, and I kind of stopped. And my senior team for volleyball, like literally we had maybe 15 or 16 kids on the team, and I was probably the third from the shortest. Wow. Like it was pretty big time then. And, much like lacrosse is on the East Coast, volleyball is on the West Coast, especially, the South Coast too. So I played it. I really, really enjoyed it. But I actually ended up coaching for 7 years after I graduated high school. So as I was going to college, I was also coaching. I loved that. And so, I still stay in touch with the kids that I coached my first year coaching. And wow. Yeah. So, I had nothing really unusual growing up. I love cars. I can remember the first time I got in a 65 Mustang. There was nothing adverse about it. And, I'm at the age now and what we're going through now in the world, I kind of go down little rabbit holes of analyzing myself. Like maybe I should have had more adversity growing up, so it's all pretty interesting. But we moved out here in 2004 and, money. I think that comes into play first. So we lived in Santa Margarita, which is South Orange County, and we had a townhouse. It was 1,398 square feet. It was 2 stories. We had a little bit of a yard for being a townhouse, and we butted up to a really busy street. It never stopped humming, like never. So I worked for an event marketing company that was literally down the street. It was like a mile from our house. And the owner of that company, he said, we did a lot of work for companies that were involved in racing, mostly racing, other stuff, but mostly racing. And he said, I'm going to build a shop out in North Carolina. And he's like, I want you, Sean, to move out there first and come with me. And a year prior, Kendra and I were like, we're never moving from here. This place is great. And then fast forward to a year, we have an opportunity to move and have a job that, not have to switch jobs and find something. And the housing market in California, even then, so this is like late 2003, was still on fire. So we looked at the mathematics of it. We looked at the property values out here and we're like, where do we sign up? And so, we bought that townhouse for $243,000 and sold it for $406,000 in 3 years on the nose, 3 years.
What was it in California that made it blow up like that? Is it just popularity all of a sudden, or was it what made it?
It's the weather.
Jump?
It's the weather.
Yeah.
So the weather, in my opinion, I think most people would agree that the weather is phenomenal. Yeah. So where we were 90 miles north of San Diego, and I think technically San Diego has the most days in the U.S. Over 75 degrees. I think they're like 300 days a year over 75 degrees. So that from a perfect weather scenario, San Diego's about it. So we're 90 miles north of that.
The tacos are pretty good out there too.
They're pretty good too. And then the last 25 years, you have all these tech jobs that are bubbling up and originating anywhere from northern Los Angeles into the valley all the way down to San Diego. And so you have the jobs that can support, those housing prices. And so, there you have it. It's not, in my opinion, it's not a complicated equation to figure out why it's so popular.
Right.
Now, or at least I would go back at least once or twice a year, what I was doing with my job, and just to kind of be out of it and then get back in it and see it. The volume of people is shocking. Like I don't even know where these people come from. It's just so many people. And, I think we were talking about this the other day. I think there's like 10 million people in the state of North Carolina, something like that, 8 to 12 million people, whatever it is. There's like 18 million people in Los Angeles.
Right.
So you're literally living on top of everybody. And that's the biggest thing that is a turn off. Yeah. If we had the money, we can go back. I just don't know if I'd want to do it.
Yeah.
But, getting back to the weather thing, it's like Santa Barbara and Charlotte are exactly east-west of each other. So the climates are similar. Not exact, but they're similar. Yeah. So, and I'm a big weather snob. So as long as I'm living south of that line, everything's good.
Yeah. So you could never live in the north?
No, sir. Yeah. Not a chance. I've known a lot of people that have lived like in Wisconsin, and they say like the gray blob comes in at about late September, early October, and it doesn't leave till like early May.
Yeah. It's depressing.
No way.
Literally depressing.
Yeah.
So when you were in California, were you into racing then? Was there's a NASCAR track in California, right?
Yeah, there's one in Fontana. That was probably from where we lived, I don't know, 25, 30 miles.
Okay.
I was always into cars. I wasn't necessarily into racing. And, I ended up, getting pulled into the NASCAR world because at the time that was where all the money was. So if you wanted to pursue it as a job, that was kind of what you had to do if you wanted to, be in the racing world. I ended up working for a team that had, they had teams in NASCAR, they had teams in IndyCar, IMSA, sports car racing. They had at the time a few years GRC, Global Rallycross. So they were kind of very diverse in the types of platforms they raced in. NASCAR is, again, in my opinion, we'll put an asterisk after every sentence, but NASCAR is not big in the West. It never has been, and I don't think it ever will. Car culture is big in the West.
Right.
You know, like it's funny because I don't think there's a huge car culture out here in North Carolina, which is one of the hubs of a racing. You know, Indianapolis has IndyCar racing, stock car racing is hubbed out here, and at one point drag racing was Southern California, but they're in Indianapolis now. And there's not a car culture. You know, it's a boutique type of thing. People are aware of it. You know, the pit crew people and the drivers, you know, they have kids and they all kind of intermingle, and you kind of might be bumping into them at school and stuff, but there's not a huge car culture out here. And in California, that's like, it's it. And that's what I really loved. You know?
Interesting. Yeah. When I grew up, I lived just a couple of miles from the Charlotte Motor Speedway. And I believe at least once a year they would have the car show. And it was always fun because they would bring on these old cars in, and they would do the monster trucks and stuff. And so it's maybe a different kind of car culture, but you don't see it a lot. You don't see people driving those old classics and convertibles around here. California just, I guess, seems like more the place.
So if you grew up next to the racetrack, did you go there a lot or no?
Actually, no, I didn't. I mean, I grew up, we lived on a road that fed the track.
Yep.
And I distinctly remember years when they would shut the roads down and they would go one way. It's a 2-lane road, and they would just, everybody's going out, everybody's coming in. And so it was like a hurricane. If you needed to go to the grocery store, you'd better do it before or right during the race.
Right.
Because during the race, they would open it back up. You could run out to the store and come back.
Yep.
And for that inconvenience, which for my road, I mean, literally could be dangerous. If somebody had an accident, no ambulance is getting there for hours. And Humpy Wheeler would give us tickets to the practice race as a thank you. Thanks for inconveniencing your entire weekend. Here's some practice tickets. So yeah, I never went and sat in the race until I was a teenager. Mm-hmm. And then I started meeting people that had box tickets. And so that was my first race experience. Now, my dad grew up going to the race as a young man when there were just concrete stands. And he would talk about, you know, you'd be holding your drink and there would be just rubber floating on the top from the tires because they were just right there at the thing. On no back seats. It was just, you know, go out and sit and bake in the sun.
But so, I think those are two very different things, because one is very like, it's just kind of voyeuristic. You're just watching it.
Yeah.
And what I came from, you participate in it. And it wasn't participating in racing. It's like you love cars, you worked on your cars, you built your cars, whether they're old cars or new cars. And you got in, and you, like, every night of the week there was a cruise night, and everyone would go to like the Wiener Schnitzel or the Del Taco and pull up for a couple hours and just shoot the shit about cars.
Yeah.
And then on the weekends, you know, there was a loop that went down the coast and into the canyons, and it's like windy, and you would see cars that you would only see in magazines, literally only in magazines. Because, you know, we were close to the beach communities, and it's, you know, it's just a bunch of people with a bunch of money. And they like showing their cars off, and that's what I grew up in. And what you just described is kind of what the norm is out here. Everyone knows there's a racetrack here, and, you know, during a race week, it's a headache. And even if you do go, it's like going to a football game, but not having a team. It's like, oh yeah, it's a football game, I'm going to go home.
Well, but there's more to that story, I would say, because we grew up. I remember my parents going to like a random restaurant in Kannapolis, and Dale Jr. or Dale Sr. is just sitting across from him. Like, it was very normal to see Rusty Wallace, Dale Earnhardt, like out and about, because they were just good old boys from around here. And so to us, it was kind of like, oh yeah, Dale, you know, Dale won again. And I would hear stories about him, you know, passing people in the grass and all in the kind of the good old days. Richard Petty. I mean, actually, when I was a little kid, I was homeschooled all my life except for 1 year. In that 1 year, I was at an elementary school, and they brought in Kyle Petty to speak. And I remember I ran into him in the hall, and it was just one of those passing moments, and he was kind of a jerk.
Yeah.
And I remember like I was so excited to see him, and then one of the like security guards walked by, and I'm a little kid, and his radio whacked me in the head. And so I was just thinking, I don't like this Kyle Petty guy. So I always was kind of excited when he was in like 40th place. But yeah, that was the culture. It was just like, I mean, for him, looking back, it was like, oh boy, I got to go to this elementary school 5 minutes down the road and speak to these kids. So it was like a close kind of community thing. And when the race would come into town, me living several miles away, it was like we didn't participate, but the people that were going, I always thought it was fascinating because I feel like it's dwindled in recent time, but back then people would come out for weeks.
Yep.
And it was like their big vacation. They'd pull the trailer out and have the awning and the flags, and it was just a really big experience. And I do remember as a teenager, my parents, they a lot of times would go to the mountains. They're like, race is coming, we're going to the mountains. And they would just leave town until everybody was gone. Because, yeah, I mean, the traffic was so bad before Speedway Boulevard was built.
Yep.
It would take hours and hours and hours to clear people. And that's with people camping. That's just the inbound people. Yep. So they're coming out, and there's just cops everywhere, and they would shut the roads, and that was a disaster. But I do remember when the bridge fell.
Oh, yeah.
And that was a weird experience because I lived close enough to where basically we could walk through the woods, and then there was a trailer park that's real close to the track, and we would walk through the trailer park, and then you'd pop out through the woods and you were in the campgrounds.
Yep.
And when we saw that on the news, for whatever reason, my buddies and I were like, my brothers and stuff were like, let's go see it. So we walked over there. We were there, in 30 minutes or so, and it was a disaster. There was just people everywhere, cops everywhere.
Yeah.
But even amongst all that, the fans, if you were just walking by, they would just hand you a hot dog. Like, it was just so I don't think it's that way anymore, but they're like, hey, you boys want a hot dog? And they're just here. And it was just this community. Like, it felt like when you were walking through the campground, everybody was just friends and having a big party.
Yeah, I think there's a few main things working against it on why it's not as popular as it used to be. But I think that when the times were good, the model was set up in a way, the financial model was set up in a way where it was good. When times are bad, the model does not work. And that's the main thing that I see is not helping the sport grow. And, people, one of the narratives you hear is that their fans are literally dying off. And that's absolutely true.
Wow,
You mentioned monster trucks, Feld Entertainment owns that property, and they're based out in Tampa-ish area. And I listened to their CMO at one point. He was on a panel somewhere talking about sports entertainment, and he said that his main goal is to fill the stands with 12-year-old boys and girls because he knows that if you can get them at that age, then they'll get older, they'll follow it. Then when they have their family, it'll start the cycle over again. And I think NASCAR, for whatever reason, they targeted and provided a product that fit a certain age demo. And then as that age demo gets older, they didn't spend a ton of effort looking to the next generation to keep, fulfilling their fans or supplementing their fans.
Well, and I think you're right. Looking back at, when my dad was younger, I know he and my uncle would go out to, there's a small stadium that's now basically weeds, closer to uptown Charlotte. It's really hard to describe.
Metrolina?
Yeah, it's in the Metrolina field. And so they would go out there. It's literally just an overgrown dump now.
They actually took it all out like within the last 6 months.
Oh, did
so
they?
it's literally dirt right now.
Wow, that's sort of sad. It's on a documentary I saw recently about old tracks, but they would go and watch, and it just had the feeling. Again, I wasn't even born then, but had the feeling of, hey, it's something to do. It's Friday night. Let's just go get some beers and go watch the cars go around. And then when you just amplify that to Charlotte Motor Speedway, I think, and again, who knows, but I think one of the mistakes was they just kept putting in more and more stands.
Yep.
And it's like it cost more to buy a hot dog there than the ticket to the race.
Yep.
But I will say, my first experience at the race, you have to be there in person.
Yep.
You have no idea how powerful the engines of these cars are until you feel it rumbling in your chest. Like it's really like shocking.
Yeah, it's and that's really all of motorsports.
Yeah.
And every different type of motorsport has a different type of car, and those all sound different, and there's just different characteristics about it. And absolutely, every motorsport really is muted if you watch it on television. And NASCAR, they've been pushing, it's a family sport and access is great, and and I think those cars, they're naturally aspirated V8s running really through no muffler. They're one of the best sounding cars out there. However, I still think drag racing provides the best sensory overload experience.
No, I've not done the drag race.
Yeah, that's a cup car has 800 horsepower, a drag race car, top fuel car has 10,000 horsepower.
Wow.
And you can feel it in your chest when two cars are running. And, when the grid goes in a cup race, you can't really, it's very loud, but you can't feel it. And, that was kind of what I was raised in when I was a kid. And we were 16 years old. I remember getting with my buddy and driving out to Pomona and watching two fuel cars leave the line. And I didn't know what to expect because that was my first time. And it almost blew my head off.
Yeah.
And that's something that sport provides that nothing else does, and that does not come through on television. So it's always been an event first thing, and not necessarily like any other stick and ball sport. So you're absolutely right. It's a sensory overload, and back in the day, Formula One was probably the best sounding sport until they drastically changed that. Setup in those cars. So it's they all attract different fan bases, and they all, maybe at the surface they look somewhat similar, but there's different nuances per each fan base.
Well, and watching that stadium grow as a kid, I'm trying to remember what it used to be called. I feel like it had a different name when I was a kid. It was like, because the cigarette company is right down the road, and there used to be the Winston Cup.
Yeah.
When Philip Morris was around, and obviously Charlotte was always famous because of the Coca-Cola 600. That's the longest race, but to see that built up, they built. It's hard to even imagine it now, but where I grew up was so close that it was just hills of dirt.
Yep.
And then they leveled that and they put in the Speedway Boulevard, which has been there for 20 years or more now. But before that, it was just these tiny little roads that would come in, and then they put the dirt track in, and then they put the drag strip there too.
Yep.
So to see it build up, and then they would put the stands up and then bring them back down because nobody was filling them. I think the interesting thing about all of those facilities, like the dirt track, for instance, it's pretty much a one-purpose thing. Yep. And same with the other track. Like I went to... I can't remember if it was the 600, but they had the band Train and the Red Hot Chili Peppers playing.
I remember the Red Hot Chili Peppers. That was an all-star night.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it was the all-star night.
Yep.
And they were so far away. I feel like I can't even say that I've seen the Chili Peppers play because they were so far away, and the speakers of these little horns way up in the box. But the stadium is so huge. It's so huge when you go into something like that. It's not like, it's overwhelming to go into a football stadium or a basketball stadium. But when you see, I think Charlotte can hold at one point over 250,000 people, if not more.
I think they topped out seated people. I think they were like 120 in their heyday, and which is a shitload of people.
Yeah.
Now, I first went to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, I don't know, maybe early 90s, middle 90s. And you talk about a facility that is unbelievable. It makes Charlotte look like a little quarter-mile midget track. It's just the magnitude of that speedway is unbelievable. I mean, the short chutes are a quarter mile each, and then there's the front and back stretch are a mile, and it goes on forever. And the Indy 500, for many years, there was a period where they weren't doing the best, and then it picked back up the last 4, 5, 6 years. Like it seats 256, and they sold every seat. And then you had like another close to 100,000 people that were camping on the infield.
Right.
So it's it's its own city technically. It
Yeah.
has a police, it has a fire station, it has a jail. Like it's unbelievable. And it's again, it's a 1 year type thing. It's the Kentucky Derby, it's the Indy 500,
Yeah.
it's Monaco. But that's those are again, that's really what I miss. I don't miss the traveling all the time.
Yeah.
But being in the middle of that is something that you just really, well, not a lot of people get to partake in that. So,
Well, and I think it's good to talk about it because I think it piques people's interest just to hear stories. And like, even I'm thinking, why haven't I gone to a drag race? I should go do that,
you should.
And at Christmas, they try to utilize that facility now, and they've got the Christmas lights, and that's a really fun utilization of the space. But to know that it's right over there, and that when there's an event, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely worth checking out for sure.
Yep.
Especially if you're in the Charlotte area. I mean, it's so close. I know for people that are out of towners, we used to take them by it just because they'd never seen a facility that big.
Right.
Even when you're at Madison Square Garden, you're like, well, that's pretty big.
Yeah.
But this is just another level.
Yep.
And I imagine Indianapolis is even crazier. But
Yep.
So let's go back to your story. So
Yep.
you came out here to take that job.
Yep.
And what happened from there?
Oh geez, how much time do we have?
Yeah.
So the job. So the owner of the company, he was very entrepreneurial. If there was a buck to be made, he was going to make it. He was a terrible businessman, and he got caught up in it. We were in a niche of marketing that at the time was red hot. Like people were just throwing money at it left and right. And he got intoxicated by the money. And so he kept building and building and building, taking the money and buying a 8,000 square foot house on the lake and a Mercedes and a Rolex. And, looking back on that now, that was red flag 1, 2, and 3. So he eventually he was continuing to make poor decisions. There was a few people that kind of tried to help him, through things. And I saw the writing on the wall and I split. And within a year, he had police coming to his building in Concord and starting to repossess everything because he had just had loans that he couldn't pay, and it was a mess. So I went to work for actually an agency that we would compete against a lot. So I went to work for the competitor, and it's the GMR Marketing, which is a huge agency now. They're global, and one of the 3 founders, Brian Buskey, who's since passed away, he was the event guy. He was the mobile marketing guy. And he knew of me through what I had done at National Tour. And he made a call down to the person that ran the Charlotte office. And he said, you got to hire this kid. And so that was a huge break like that, because we had just literally moved my family out. Kendra was pregnant with Emma.
Oh, yeah.
It was
A lot of changes.
a lot of changes. So that was a huge win. And it was good. It was a big agency, and that office in particular was probably 90% NASCAR related. So Lowe's, Home Improvement, Miller Lite, Alltel, like all the Jim Beam, all the big brands from like back in the heyday, they had their hands in a lot of that. And I was kind of used as an internal consultant, so I wasn't assigned to any one team. I would just kind of float whenever they needed event marketing stuff, the strategy or creative or building things and vendors and things like that. So I never, from a professional standpoint, I never got pigeonholed. You might have, oh yeah, he's the computer guy. I was never that. I don't know if that was on purpose or not, but I really think that having a broad base of knowledge has helped me throughout my career. I'm a huge believer in learning. I don't learn the traditional way, but I love to learn. Learning and watching, and especially being in event marketing. And, when we go to Las Vegas, Las Vegas was the best for me. And it wasn't about drinking or gambling. It was about watching people interact with buildings, with machines, with restaurants, and I remember we would grab a beer and walk the whole strip and just watch people because, all the cues that the hotels do to keep your focus, between 4 and 6 feet as you walk through. They don't want you looking at the ceilings. They don't want you looking at the floors. They want everything here because that's where they put the machines. Like everything is so dialed in. How the hotels smell. They don't smell like smoke. Even those people in there smoking cigarettes and cigars, and it should stink. It doesn't stink. The lighting, everyone's heard there's no clocks. There are no clocks, then like getting to an elevator shaft, like you have to drop breadcrumbs because they want you to get lost. There's no place to sit unless you're going to sit in front of a machine. There's no place to put your beer unless it's right next to a machine. Right? There's all these things that they're doing, but they're building an experience, and their experience is ultimately the payoff is you to, choke some money in a machine and gamble it away. But, I learned a lot from Las Vegas. I learned a lot from a lot of stuff, but I really enjoyed going to Las Vegas because it was an educational tour for me every time I went out there. So I was in event marketing for a while. While at GMR, there was a former Miller executive that left Miller after I think he was with them for like 12 years, and then he went to go work for GMR, and he was there for a couple, 2-3 years, and he was starting a new sports startup. And then he got hired to go work at a race team local here. And we still stayed in touch. And then about a year later, he said, "Hey, what are you doing?" So then that's when I went to go work for the race team. And I was there almost 9 years. Wow. And, I think I was a millennial before millennials were cool, but, I never really worked anywhere 2, 3, 4 years. And like for me to work somewhere for almost 9 years is like 90 years.
Yeah.
We were involved in a lot of different forms of racing. And again, I was business development at one point. I was account management at another point, marketing at another point. So I was extremely comfortable in what I was doing, and I was very utilitarian. I can do a lot of things. But I got burned out, and, there's a lot of people that, 9 years in NASCAR, that's like, I'm still a junior. There's people that have been doing that for 20 years, and they're traveling every week, and that's all they know. Yeah. And they have a family. So it was a lot. When you're not going to a NASCAR race, you're going to an IndyCar race. And NASCAR, most of the teams, they fly private, which definitely helps. But going to IndyCar races, you got to go fly commercial. And I know Crimea River, going to a race. But when you're flying commercial every week, and hoping the flights don't get canceled, and having to wake up at 4 a.m. to make it to the airport every single weekend, it wears on you.
Sure.
And so I don't know. People always say you have to be careful of what you choose as a profession. If you choose a passion, ultimately you're not going to like it. And I kind of got to that point. And so we talked about earlier with the sport kind of nosediving from a popularity standpoint and being able to keep up what they needed to keep up financially. I didn't see it happening. And I just thought it was a good time. I kind of left on a high note, and that was it. So, and honestly, it's been rough. It's taken me these last 2 races, the Cup races, I haven't watched a single minute of them. Really? And usually I'll kind of watch here and there. I won't make it I won't block out time to watch it, but I'll at least keep up with it and pay attention to it. I haven't watched any of it. And, it's refreshing to get a little bit of your life back. And, I have 2 girls, 18 and 16, and, hanging out with them, that's different. And for a while there, it was different because they didn't know, who in the hell is this person? Because I was really never home for almost their whole life. And, I was the Disneyland dad, Yeah. So it's been an adjustment, but it's definitely interesting. And now with this whole virus thing, and it's huge pivot going on.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of changes. So this is a random question, but as a car guy, I'm a technology guy, and I see the future of cars like Tesla. So as a car guy, does a Tesla count, or does it have to have?
Yeah, I too am a techie nerd. I may not show it. It may not be my primary thing, but I love technology. I love applied technology. Yeah. And I think if the big three don't pick up what they're doing, I think they're going to lose even more. The only thing I don't like about Tesla is it doesn't make noise. And I think true car people will understand that a true car person wants to feel the input from the wheel. They want to have a gated shifter, and they want to have an amazing noise, because a car to me is art. It's kinetic art. It makes noise. You can look at it, the really cool cars, they look great, and then you can get in it and they make noise. Like, where do I sign up? So I think I've never driven a Tesla, but I know that they provide a certain experience that's really cool. Technically, I think they're the quickest car on the road.
Yep.
And that to me, because when was it the GM M1 or whatever it was that came out, that really ugly Aero all battery car, it was terrible. Yeah. And then the Prius was terrible. And so all of these e-cars and hybrid cars that were coming out, they were just so ugly, and that put a bad taste in people's mouth right off the bat. And now you look at a Tesla, good-looking car, fast, and then you have these hybrid cars. So they still have a gas engine, although the gas engine is very small, and it's supplemented with electricity, running electric motors. To me, that's the best of both worlds. I'm actually a little surprised that it seems the mainstream is becoming all electric, when I thought the mainstream should be hybrid, because that's more realistic. But granted, they're very expensive, but there's hypercars that have well over 1,000 horsepower, and they'll pull the skin off your face. And I think if those would have come out first to display the technology, 20 years ago, I think we would have been in a different situation now. But absolutely, a Tesla is...
So it counts.
Okay, it totally counts.
Yeah. Yeah, I drove a Nissan Leaf once, and I thought, this is not... I don't want this car.
Yeah, I remember driving a Chevy Volt. It was like, it was a golf cart.
Yeah, and it's cool, but I had the honor to work with a company in Pittsburgh that's doing AI and doing artificial intelligence self-driving cars for Ford.
Yep.
And I just feel like, even though it was a cool place, I feel like some of the old companies are trying to just throw something on top of what they've already got, instead of starting at the ground up. Where Tesla went in and said, we're going to start this thing from the ground up. Also keeping style and look. There's been attempts at electric cars like the Leaf and other ones that it's fine, but you don't look at it and say, man, I want to get in that car. Yep. It was, I've driven a Prius a couple times, and of course it was cool. Like from a technology, stopping for gas standpoint is great. Like I drove in the Prius from here to Washington DC without stopping. Like it never ran out, and it was great. But the Tesla looks great. Yes. And the truck, I want the truck. Kim says no, but the truck looks crazy. It looks like something that I would have designed as a 9-year-old.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But I love it. I think it's fantastic. You push a button, the tailgate opens. It's just innovation. So I hope that I feel like
when do you see AI coming on full bore as being a normal option in a car?
That's a good question. And when I was in Pittsburgh talking to these folks, I was asking them things like, I made a comment and said, man, you guys really must have politicians breathing down your neck. And they said, no, nobody cares, which is really shocking to me that they're doing cars that can drive themselves and nobody's really paying attention. Mm-hmm. I go back and forth on that, because I think I would trust a computer over a teenager texting any day. Yeah. Because the computer is going to be looking out. Of course, there's going to be accidents and there's going to be tragedies, and then we need to find out. It's like a Tesla recently smashed into the side of a truck, and it just, But for the most part, after investigation, it's like, oh well, they were not doing the right thing. Or there was a guy who died in a Tesla recently that not recently, but he was basically just like sleeping in the car and letting it drive himself. It's like, we're not quite there yet. Right. I think the technology already exists, but I think that they're taking slow steps to get there. But to hear them talk about how the government's not really paying attention, that was a little scary maybe. Yep. But also exciting, because as soon as the government starts regulating it, it's going to slow everything down. Yep. Versus, one of the biggest, from what I understand, one of the biggest deficits in jobs right now is truckers.
Yep.
And we live in a world of, I want that thing that I got on Amazon right now. And we're getting close. Like we're getting to, in Charlotte, I know there's some things you can get within 2 hours, which is unbelievable. But from when I was a kid and you ordered that thing off the cereal box and it would literally be 2 months or more later to today, it's incredible. But with self-driving trucks, with tractor trailers that can just drive uninhibited from California and whatever, it's just going to open up what we can deliver. So I think that it's going to be a necessary thing, and I think it's going to be a great thing. However, the problem that it poses is now we don't necessarily need the truck drivers, which is, you get your CDL and you start driving a truck. Now we need battery mechanics.
Yep.
And at this point in time, because I asked somebody recently, if you have a Tesla, you can't just take it to Joe's automotive shop. You have to go to a Tesla place. There's a lot of those unanswered, what is society going to look like now? What are jobs going to look like now? That will open up a whole nother wing of industry, because once other companies do come on board, then we're going to have third party, we do electric car only garages and all that stuff. So we're going to have to be ready for a shift. And I think, who knows? I think if the government gets involved, it'll slow it down, maybe for good, maybe for bad.
Yeah.
But I think the technology is probably, if it's not already here, it's within the next 5 years to where it could just, a majority of trucks being manufactured. The framework's already laid out. Tesla already has self-driving trucks.
Yep.
I might get this wrong, but Uber has their own version as well.
Yep.
And I also, speaking of Uber, I very much see AI, self-driving. You don't have to worry about putting your daughter in an Uber to go to the airport. It's just going to be a computer.
Yep.
And, then you can feel even more safe.
Yeah.
So I think we will see. I'm excited to see if Tesla does start bringing options that are a little more affordable. Because right now, entry level Teslas are, I think, in the 30,000s.
Yeah.
Which is not insane, but they do get up, if you want all the features and stuff, it's right under 100,000 for a car.
Yep.
So if you look at what Elon Musk has said he was going to do, he's stuck with it, and that was make a luxury product to make enough money to make an affordable product, and then ultimately make something that everybody could have and afford. And I think that's going to be the catalyst, is whenever it's normal to get in a Tesla or a Tesla-like vehicle.
Yep.
The thing I don't know if I'd say disappointed, but I would like to see, as you said, some of the big guys come to the table and have something that's just as good.
Yeah. Not to talk about racing too much, but I think these two topics could merge. So when racing started, 110 years ago, like professional racing, the Indianapolis 500 was 500 miles. And that was a big deal because cars didn't last 500 miles at, full out. The average or top speed of the first 500 was like 74 miles an hour.
Really?
And that was like, people were shocked that happened.
Yeah.
But racing was somewhat developed to test automotive systems, engines, transmissions, tires, everything. And that worked for many years because they would literally, it was a marketing platform, and, you had your hero drivers, but ultimately the manufacturers are learning from testing and from racing, because you're stressing every system for a very short period of time because you want stuff to break, because then you can fix it.
Yeah.
That dies down. Where we are now, races that are 500 or 600 miles, nobody cares. Like the car, like very few cars blow up anymore because of a mechanical malfunction. So there is a company in the UK called RoboRace, and they are taking AI and applying it to racing. And I think they're on the undercard of some Formula E events, but their cars looks like an open wheel car minus the cockpit, because obviously there's no person in there. And they are running driverless races on like a Saturday morning leading into the Sunday main show.
Driverless.
On closed circuit road and street courses. And the way it works,
So they're fancy remote control cars.
they're not remote.
Oh,
They're AI. So they're running off satellites and they're running off intelligence. And
so there's not even a controlled driver.
so the way it works is they put a car on the track and they do their recon lap. So they're going around slow, but they're scanning everything. And then they keep increasing the speed after speed, or lap after lap. And they're running fairly comparable times to what the humans are doing. And I'm not sure if they've had a full-blown race yet. I kind of lost my connection to them. But what they are doing could help NASCAR. And it could help Ford, Chevy, and Toyota, because what's happening is road and street course racing, turning left and right, elevation, that's very difficult. Circle track racing from an AI standpoint and scanning, not difficult. It's like a baseball diamond. It's fixed. Each track is different, but it's fixed. And I think that you could give money, the manufacturers could fund a program to develop a car that's full AI, and it runs on the Sunday morning prior to the Cup race, and maybe there's 5 of them or 6 of them, and they run a driverless race and they see which one wins. I also think that you look at all the great drivers that have passed away, and their data exists. Their input, feet, shifting, hands exist. That data exists somewhere. You could train a computer to drive like Dale Sr. or Ayrton Senna. And to me, I would watch that in 2 seconds. Like, absolutely, I would watch it. And then I think the culmination is you have a Cup race with 40 cars. 20 of them have people in them and 20 of them don't. Now you're talking. Now kids are going to watch that. Now granted, I have 2 daughters. They're very girly. They, even though I grew up in it and I was always around it, they never been to a race. They have no intention of watching racing.
Right.
So, but like young kids, if you tell them a robot is racing a person, you bet your ass they're going to watch that.
Yeah.
And I think that brings back a whole audience, because now you're just watching to see what happens.
Sure.
And then the humans that are in the cars driving, no one wants to be the first person to lose to a robot.
Right.
So now they're going to be really driving the car.
One day I want to do a podcast on AI and talk about that, because
The applied version of AI.
I think to the common person that doesn't know anything about technology, it's just, what's AI? Artificial intelligence, And there's I was at a security meeting actually, and a guy was talking about AI and how the ultimate dream, maybe not the dream, but the ultimate goal of AI is literally called Skynet, where it is totally able to think on its own.
Yep.
But I saw a simple application the other day. There's a great documentary on, and I can't recall the name. That it's a board game with black and white tokens, and you just
I don't know the name of it.
I can't remember.
I know what you're talking about. Yep.
But in the beginning, the guy was explaining AI with, and I can't recall the name of this either. It's basically Pong, where the ball bounces and it blows up the bricks. And after 500 plays, the AI, the computer, it just basically starts thinking like, well, that plan didn't work out. Let me try this one. And the AI figured out something that humans had never figured out, which is if you dig a little trench on the side of the game and then you get the ball on top, it'll bounce and it will basically beat the game. And so that's the benefit of artificial intelligence, at least in its form right now, because it's not totally, I think even AI might be not a great term, because it's not, it is intelligence somewhat, and it's artificial. So I guess you could throw that label on it, but it's showing humans like, oh, that is a good way to do things. Because what we're able to do with that AI is just unlimited tries, and you just get data rather than a human trying over and over again. You just get data after data after data. It reminds me of Iron Man when he builds the ultimate AI in Ultron, which again is sort of like an allusion to that's the perfect AI, is he can upgrade himself and everything. But Tony Stark just walks away and has Jarvis just repeat, and ultimately he's like, oh, I can make this work. And then Ultron comes on. But I think it can help us in so many ways. Again, I'd love to do a whole podcast on just AI.
A friend of mine, I won't use his name because he works for a large IT company, but he said, and it's true, we're being harvested for our data. Anytime you ask Siri or Alexa, or you type into Google a question, that's being stored and learned from, because, and even it's very basic. You can see it in front of your eye on Google. When you start to type in the first few letters, you get all of the variations underneath it. Netflix, everyone says Netflix knows what I want to watch before I want to know, or before I know what I want to watch. That's not an accident, and that's all based on data. And so I got a good education on AI. I was trying to work with an IT company who was a sponsor of ours at one point, and I wanted a machine to do a certain task. And they basically said, you need millions of inputs for this thing to start to learn anything.
Sure.
And I think that's going to be a barrier to entry now, at least today. But it's there. I mean, the computing power is there, and it's only getting faster every day. But it's just the ability to take learnable data and variable data and identify trends and put it into a machine and have it go from there. Even though I think I've heard the virus now, they're using AI to figure out what the strain could be, in another 6 months or whatever.
Well, and I saw this coming, gosh, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago, if not more, when people like Bank of America started hiring, I'm going to get the word wrong, statisticians. Yeah, where these guys are coming out of college that learn statistics, and they're not doing accounting. They're studying petabytes of data. And they're looking for those little spikes. Because the other term that's kind of floated around when you're talking AI is machine learning, which is it requires input from a human. The human has to train it, and then it kind of learns on its own. But with those statistics dumped into the machine and human intervention, eventually they'll be able to do something useful with the data. So like, for instance, there was a guy that did a TED Talk. My wife ran into him in the New York airport, and he had just talked about how to Google, there's this string of numbers that constitutes the first place you had a date with your wife, the first restaurant or whatever. It doesn't really matter to Google, but it's valuable to you if you could piece it together and say, this is where we had our first date, and this is when we took that walk, when we got engaged, or those numbers that are floating out in the ether. If they could find a way to make them human and give them to you, it is of value.
Yeah, and even on the marketing side, the automated marketing things that exist, I think, are really cool. I think those are still being developed now. They're not totally dialed in. But, again, I just think when you create content, something like this, there should be a machine learning or listening to certain cues in there, and then, building a case off of that. Like the same company that, I was talking to about AI, they in the past would buy all the raw data from Twitter for like $20 million a year, and they would get all the raw data, and then they would extract data points out of there and sell that data to companies that was, I think, the first wave of AI, because it sounded still very manual process, but they were able to glean information based off of that data. And since then, one of the things they developed was a system that's actually used in the NFL draft. So when a team is looking to draft a player in a certain position, there are certain data points that they're looking for, whether their burst speed, how much they can bench press, whatever the number is. The one thing that was hard to measure was their heart. Like, they don't want a cancer in the locker room. They don't want a player that on paper he's really gifted, but he just rips apart the culture. So they, through all the data that's out there, largely on social media, they were able to capture that and score it. And so you had an athlete that would put up numbers from 40-yard dash and bench press and all this other stuff, and then they had a heart score. Wow. And
scary.
I think that's also being used for with cities when they interview police officers and things like that, just to make sure that they're fitting into the the system, not like the Patriots, but you're fitting into a system. But there's, for every 10 instances where you use data and AI to be very positive and help society move forward, there's always going to be that one thing that's just going to totally grenade the whole deal.
Well, yeah, I think that we have a lot to learn. I mean, even in the past decade with the automated marketing, people look at it as sketchy and scary. Like, oh, they heard me talking about this, wanting a new mattress, and now I'm getting mattress advertisements.
Yeah.
Well, it's because it hasn't been helpful yet. It's more spammy. That's popping up, and you're like, yeah, I mean, I did. Like, for instance, I bought a new rocking chair. One of the screws broke on it, so I looked up the website to file a claim to get it fixed. Now I'm getting advertisements.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, I've already got the chair. It'd be nice to say thanks, but I've already got it. It needs to be a little more intelligent.
Yeah. Because I noticed the same thing where I'll research something, I'll buy it, and then a week later I'll get an ad for the same thing. And it's like, it's not quite, it should know I purchased it already.
Yeah.
And then it should be suggesting things of accessories to it or something
Right.
like that.
Well, and I think that's where, in my estimation, Siri is the worst.
Terrible. And I'm shocked at that.
Well, I'm not shocked because Apple is very security conscious. And the only way you get more intelligent is to take people's information.
Yep.
And the others, Google Home and the others, they listen all the time.
Yep.
And they just take information. Yep. And it does get a little bit scary because you start thinking, okay, what would my heart score be? Is somebody going to say, man, he's a real piece of work. I'm not working with that guy. Right. And I want to kind of twist the conversation back to how we met too, which is the human element. So when I met you, we used technology to end up meeting up via the Facebook group for our neighborhood, which is a fantastic idea. You had done it at another neighborhood.
Yeah.
But it gives the sense of community because everybody's on Facebook for the most part.
Yep.
But I find myself anytime somebody posts on the neighborhood, I'm interested. I want to know what's going on. Maybe a water pipe broke. Maybe somebody's, there's a food truck coming or whatever. But we met via the Facebook group, which ultimately led to us having a little block party. Yep. And then the human interaction comes. So I don't think that's replaceable, and I talk about this a lot as a technology person. One of the points of the podcast for me, and I think you've kind of alluded to it here as well, is that people are multifaceted in almost an infinite number of ways. Mm-hmm. And when you get pigeonholed as, for me, for example, several people that I've mentioned to the podcast, they think, oh boy, I'm not listening to a podcast about computers. and
it's so interesting.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, I don't want to listen to a podcast about computers either. So why would I make one like that? So I'm a social person. I like to have deeper conversations, interact with humans. And I think especially during the coronavirus, introverts, extroverts alike, everybody just is thirsting for, let's get together and talk and hear stories and experiences and stuff. So I think I applaud you for starting that group and for doing all that you've done for just our community and our neighborhood, because, it's a start small world. I mean, it's very daunting to look at the United States, much less the globe, and think that you can have any impact on it. Yep. But to know that for us, our little community and even our tiny neighborhood within that community, I feel like has grown partially to your efforts and everybody's efforts to participate. And we've already had some drama, of course. There's people doing things that are okay. Yeah,
but again, it's getting back to the bigger thing of technology shouldn't dominate everything. It should be a supplement to humans. And as long as you keep technology in that box,
right,
it will always advance. It will always get better, whatever it is. But if it's supplementing your human life, that's the best. And
agreed. Yeah,
I think too many people get stuck sitting behind a computer all day and they're just keyboard warriors and they just, they're spewing BS all the time. And that is not good. Yeah. But I think that's also the minority of people. And, we're all grown adults that, we use that page as a form of communication, but ultimately it usually pays off with a food truck night or the pool opened an hour earlier. There's a food truck. It's an easier way to communicate. And because everyone on that page lives in here, everyone has a financial vested interest in the area we live in and who your neighbors are.
Well, and it's a fantastic way, and anybody that's listening, I would encourage you to do the same in your neighborhood. If either join or create a new group, because just geographically where you live, normally I probably wouldn't have met you, just because you're right around there instead of right beside me. And I've even noticed literally, like, if you're just out of sight, there's a little bit of distance going on. But because of that group, it's brought people together with like interests. You know, we had a group of guys come over the other day. It was like 20 some people showed up. And honestly, it's like, wow, this is incredible. This is overwhelming, because I see this group of guys walking with their chairs coming. I'm like, those guys coming over?
But that's, I mean, and especially now, because it's, we've been here a year and 2 days, I think, officially. And up until the virus hit, from the time we moved into, you know, roughly February of this year, I'm sorry, no, maybe even prior to that, there was a lot of people out. Like, we would walk, I mean, we'd walk a lot, and it's like, where is everybody? And as soon as the virus hit, things change, dynamics change, and now there's people out all the time. And that to me is cool. That's the whole reason. But, you know, we're a community, when we're all said and done, I think there's gonna be 300 houses in here. And I think you just keep getting bigger and bigger, and that's the rest of the country. You know, eventually people are going to be tired, and I think they already are tired of what we're going through. And so the thirst and the need to talk with people face to face is going to dominate, and I think it already is starting to dominate. And that's the gray area of where this thing is all going, because it's hard to tell people to do something when that's every ounce of their body saying, I don't want to do that. So it's, you know, and then you throw on the political stuff on top of it, and it just gets too much. But at the core of it, people need to interact with people, period. And if you use technology to get to that point, that's great. That's the whole point of technology. So, you know.
I think that's well said. And I don't think anybody knows what to do moving forward, and not to get into all that, but it's, you know, even within the rules of the way the state's laid it out, we can still get together. We can still do things. We can still go out and exercise. No, I know for one, walking, we did a 5K here on the 4th of July, which was terrible. So
it was a little warm.
Bad idea to have dinner first and then run. Not good. But I think that especially in this community, I know without that, it just wouldn't be the same. And now, I mean, I come from a huge neighborhood with 3,000 homes or something. So 10 times the size. And I'm not kidding. The lady that lived directly across from me for a decade, I don't know her name. And I don't think I've ever actually had a conversation with her. And a lot of people, you know, if they want to live that way, that's to each his own. But even in a community that's a tenth of the size, not even yet, I can sit on my porch now and just people come by and say hello, and everybody's welcoming, because you've had that opportunity through technology. And then technology is just the tip of the spear. And then it's having the guys come over, we'll hang out and talk, and, you know, developing relationships. And, and I think it's great. So
it's fun.
So what's next for you?
I think I was one of 25 million people that lost their normal job in March, the end of March, and it wasn't a shock. I like to think one of my ninja skills is I kind of watch popular culture and I kind of see what's going on. I'm not overly passionate about really much of anything, so I'm not emotionally invested in things, and that doesn't let me drive my what I'm going to do. So I'm very much, you know, even as a kid, I was somewhat introverted, and I just kind of watch. And it wasn't a shock. And the way things were going and how quickly they were building up. And the company I worked for was a small mom and pop company, and I kind of knew it was going to happen. So that helped soften the blow. I'm not one to sit back and kind of watch the world go by. You know, I had maybe a week or two of like, oh, this sucks. But so I started my own business. It's been an eye opener. It's a lot of work. Yes, anything is a lot of work, but finding the right path to take given the current climate has been the most difficult. And we talked about this even before we started. It's tough because there are businesses that are still functioning. They're not necessarily making a ton of money, but they're keeping the lights on, and therefore they're really focusing on what they're spending money on. And a lot of people are just kind of sitting on as much money as they can, waiting to see what's going to happen. So, I'm doing pro bono work just to get my name out there, and it's kind of like the cost of entry. I'm learning a ton. What I'm doing now, it's a marketing and strategy type consultancy. Creating content is really big. Making a commercial when we were kids would have taken tens of millions of dollars, and to put it on a station to push it out. All this stuff is almost next to free. Like you don't need to have a ton of equipment and a ton of knowledge, and the knowledge you don't have, you can go learn on YouTube in 2 seconds. So that's the cool part of it. And being able to highlight what I'm doing now is I'm doing a lot of video work right now, working with a lot of local businesses and to help promote what they're doing. I really enjoy it. It's really fun. The next 4, 5, 6 months is still going to be kind of in the gray area because not a lot of people are spending money on anything. Right. So I need to keep my head down. I need to keep busy and keep learning. That's my biggest thing that I need to do right now, and pushing forward and seeing what happens after that.
Well, I want to say something about that because even though it's easy, it's still something that has to be done, right. and it's not. I was just talking to you earlier about there's so many businesses out there that just sort of flippantly say, yeah, we'll just make a 10-minute little video. Mm-hmm. And it's like, no, you won't. Like you literally will not do that. Yeah. So I think for you, it's a fantastic way. And again, I think it's great that you've helped out these local businesses. Cause I mean, we had the discussion before we started. I've helped out a lot of people and just given away hours and hours of my services, because I know people are hurting and that it's hard times right now. But at the same time, I think the hope is they're going to recognize that. And then when the time comes and they can afford it, they're going to come back to you. Mm-hmm. And if they don't, it is what it is. You've got some more stuff. But yeah, even though it is easy, it's not, because you have to put in the effort. You've got to watch the YouTube videos. You have to understand it, pay attention to it. So, that's really the expertise that I think somebody's paying for going to you is, hey, not everybody sees things the right way. No one has lived your life and your experiences. The podcast is called Overcoming Average because your average person doesn't do. Most people will say, man, I'd really like to make a video, but I'm going to watch Netflix tonight. And they choose not to do that. Right. Or they choose to spend time on what they do best, and then they just pass that off. And I know that in this world of social media, everything is a video or a text or a blog or a picture. Yep. And if you're not doing that, you are going to fail eventually.
Yeah. And, and still to me, the biggest thing is like, even I like to see how quickly I can, like when we stream YouTube on our TV and they show a pre-roll ad for 5 seconds and it says you can skip the ad in 5 seconds. I like to see how quickly I can hit, because I'm not paying attention to it.
Right.
And I think, content, that word is thrown around a lot and people don't really understand what that is. They may have a misconception of it. If you're trying to sell a product, a thing, a service, it needs to be in the middle. It needs to be about the content, and it can't necessarily be up front. Pre-roll YouTube is fairly inexpensive, and if you have enough money to get the volume, it will probably help you in the long run. But it's not a silver bullet. I think that's why everyone, especially if you're a local business, if you're a local restaurant or a beer, or if you're making a physical product, you have to put content out, featuring that, using that, talking to people, other people that use it. Yeah. Who are your ambassadors? Brand, every brand has an ambassador. Put them in front of a camera. Put them in front of a microphone. And that's the stuff that, if it's done correctly and creatively, that becomes your commercial, and they're not going to skip through that.
Right.
And then if it's really good, they're going to blow through, like, you all hear like, oh, you should never make a video more than 2 to 5 minutes long because people are going to lose their attention. If it's good, it could be 2 hours and people will watch it. Like Joe Rogan, his podcast, he's got 30 million people to follow him. His podcast is like an hour and a half minimum.
Yeah. Well, and I obviously experienced that as well. I do for my business, micro, short, and long content.
Right.
Just because when we talk about that human interaction, it's hard to get to know somebody in a 2 or 3 minute video. It's not going to happen. But sometimes you just need to tell somebody. I posted a video the other day for the technology company about here's how to close the tabs on your iPhone by default. Right. So you get 100 tabs and you don't even know what they are. You can have them automatically closed once a month or once a week or what have you. And so I just throw that out there, and a couple people are like, oh, thank you. That's going to make my life better.
Yep.
So that doesn't need to be an hour long. But even the way we ingest content now with the podcast, when I listen to a 2 or 3 hour podcast, it's not at one sitting. I've got a 45-minute drive, and then I'm going to go for a run, and I know one of the Joe Rogans I listened to was Edward Snowden, and it was like 3 hours. But it was 3 hours of, to me, very interesting content, and I digested it as needed. But I think our world is totally ready for that. But also, we are a culture of flip through as quick as possible, and people are getting sort of gimmicky with like, how can I catch their eye? But we also, I've noticed a lot of trends is when you want to show somebody something, you say, here, look at this, and you show them your phone. Hey, check this product out. I want to show you this new coffee cup or whatever it is. And then that's all you need to do to explain it, is just show them a video. But if you don't have the video, if you're not making the content,
if you're
in trouble.
If you're not active on social media, whether it's personally or professionally, you don't exist. And I know that may sound harsh, but there's so many platforms out there that you could kind of show you what your brand is all about, your personal brand. And if you're not participating in that, and a lot of people don't, a lot of people think that's just too much, and I don't want people to see me, which is totally fine. But if you are trying to use social media, especially for business purposes, and you're not creating content of any sort, good luck. Good luck.
I mean, I think about certain industries like restaurants. They could maybe survive without a lot of it. But how do you go to a new restaurant? You hear about it. You see somebody else comment, we had a great dinner. You look it up on Yelp, and you're willing to, I'll try that place. But if you look it up on Yelp and there's 0 reviews, 0 pictures, at least people my age and younger, millennials and stuff, they're not going to go.
I mean, really, there's a local brewery, did a video for them, and their logo, their sign, the only front-facing sign they have is on the actual door. So it's like maybe a 2-foot block with their logo on it. Other than that, you have no idea where they are. And so we never talked about this, but I knew of it through word of mouth, and we used one of the businesses next door, so I kind of knew where they were. But I wanted to make sure that the opening shot in the video was a drone shot of the street, so people can identify and swoop in and see where they are, because they literally have no signage on the front of the street. So, but it's stuff like that. That's a very small little thing, but that was very much planned, and it's helpful, because now when they push that video out, they don't, there's an address at the very end, so obviously you can punch in an address to your phone. But for local people, and if they have an attention span of 10 seconds, in that first 5 seconds, they know where that brewery is. And that's how the content should work for you. It's figure out where your weak spots are and have your content fill that gap in to help communicate whatever you're trying to communicate.
Well, and I can say, even from a personal level, you posted a video of, I believe it was CrossFit Davidson, and your flyover shot flies over the little antique stores and stuff there. And I had never been to those stores. But after you did the flyover, I don't know how to explain it. Maybe it was less intimidating to me. I thought I could check that out. It looks like there's parking in the back, and I could go. So I went to the stores. And
that was, and again, I mean, who doesn't like a drone? They're fun. It's a cool toy, and they create awesome videos. But I'm using them very purposeful because I think a lot of people in this small town of 13,000 people don't know where CrossFit Davidson is.
Agreed.
So that was the whole reason to do that, because I faced towards a college. Everyone knows where the college is, and there's a church with a very tall steeple on the corner of the college, which kind of is an aerial anchor point.
Yep.
And you drop down, and you're right there, and now everyone knows where they are.
Yes.
That was done on purpose.
Yeah.
You know, so it's, you know, I'm not a genius when it comes to that, but I look at every job as, okay, what do I know about this place and what don't I know about this place?
Good.
And you're just kind of watching. And again, they have one sign out front that's pretty low, and they don't really, there's not a whole lot of, you know, traffic that's going to see them. So right off the bat, it's like we need to show people where physically they are located, you know. So it's just common sense, you know.
Yeah. Well, for anybody listening, definitely check Brad's stuff out. So how would they get a hold of you?
So bzstrategicpartners.com is the website. I am putting most all of my new recent videos on that website. And then I'm also on YouTube, BZ Strategic Partners, BZ Strategy on Instagram. So if you type in on Google BZ Strategic Partners, something's going to get pulled up and it'll kind of pull you back to the same spot. But yeah, contact information is there. And, you know, I talked to my dad recently and he's like, well, how's it going? And talked to my uncle, you know, how's it going? And I said, you know, it's going good. I'm just kind of letting it happen and seeing kind of where the sweet spot is, because I did not have a hardcore idea of like, it's going to be this and it's going to be this or nothing. So I'm just kind of letting it play out. Yeah. And I'm finding stuff that could blossom and other stuff that I probably shouldn't spend time on. So, but it's interesting. It's a learning process.
Well, and I have a saying that I've kind of adopted and even talked at length on the podcast about: action leads to the strategy. So sometimes you just got to do, and then you realize, oh, this is what I'm good at, or this is what I want to do more of this. I want to do less of that. So yeah, that's great. I think that's fantastic. So, well, thanks for coming on, man. This is a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Sure.
Awesome. Thanks.
No problem.